James Wilson had always been a dreamer, even as a small boy growing up in a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of Atlanta. His mother, Evelyn, a dedicated elementary school teacher, had raised him alone after his father passed away from a sudden heart attack when James was only 7 years old. Those early days were tough, with Evelyn often working 2 jobs to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. But no matter how tired she was, she never missed a chance to tell her son that he could reach for the stars. "The sky isn't the limit, James," she would say, pointing up at the airplanes that occasionally flew over their small home. "It's just the beginning." Perhaps that's why James had fallen in love with aviation from such a young age. While other kids collected baseball cards or comic books, James gathered airline timetables and airplane models. He would spend hours at the local library reading books about famous pilots and the history of flight. By the time he was 15, he could identify almost any commercial aircraft just by the sound of its engines overhead. Evelyn noticed her son's passion and did everything she could to nurture it. Even though money was always tight, on his 16th birthday, she surprised him with a trip to the local airport's observation deck. They spent the entire day watching planes take off and land, with James explaining every detail to his mother, who listened with genuine interest. One day, "Mom, I'm going to work with airplanes," he told her that afternoon, eyes still fixed on the runway where a large jet was preparing for takeoff. "I believe you," she replied, squeezing his hand, "and I'll be right here cheering you on." True to his word, the day after James graduated high school, he applied for a job as a baggage handler at Atlanta International Airport. It wasn't glamorous work. The hours were long, the pay was minimal, and the weather conditions were often brutal. But to James, it was the first step on a journey he was determined to complete. While his friends from high school moved away to attend prestigious colleges, James worked during the day and took night classes at the local community college. He studied business management and aviation technology, often arriving to class still in his baggage handler uniform, sometimes so tired that he had to pinch himself to stay awake during lectures. Evelyn worried about him pushing himself too hard, but James assured her it would all be worth it someday. "I'm not just moving bags, Mom," he would tell her. "I'm learning how every part of the airline works from the ground up," and learn he did. James had an uncanny ability to absorb information and a natural talent for solving problems. His supervisors quickly noticed how he could streamline operations and improve efficiency, even at the baggage handling level. Within 3 years, he was promoted to a supervisory position, and by the time he was 25, he had moved into an entry-level management role. Each step up the ladder came with new challenges, and occasionally with painful reminders that not everyone believed a young black man belonged in leadership. There were passed-over promotions, backhanded compliments, and sometimes outright hostility. But for every person who tried to block his path, there seemed to be another who recognized his talent and helped him navigate the complex corporate world of aviation. Through it all, Evelyn remained his steadfast supporter. Even when James was offered a position at the corporate headquarters of Skyline Airways in Chicago, a move that would take him hundreds of miles away from my home, she encouraged him to accept it. "Distance can't weaken our bond," she told him the night before he left, "and I didn't raise you to stay small just to keep me company." The next 15 years saw James rise steadily through the ranks at Skyline Airways. From operations manager to regional director, then vice president of customer experience, and finally, at age 40, the chief operating officer, his reputation for fairness, innovation, and calm leadership during crises made him respected throughout the industry. Yet despite his professional success, James remained remarkably grounded. He never forgot where he came from or the people who had helped him along the way. He established scholarship programs for underprivileged youth interested in aviation careers. He mentored young professionals from backgrounds similar to his own. And most importantly, he called his mother every Sunday evening without fail. Evelyn had retired from teaching a few years earlier, but she kept busy with community volunteer work and her church choir. She followed her son's career with quiet pride, keeping a scrapbook of newspaper articles and industry publications that mentioned his accomplishments. When friends asked about him, she would simply say, "He works for an airline," never one to boast or draw attention to herself. In all those years, Evelyn had never actually flown on Skyline Airways. She wasn't afraid of flying, She had taken a few trips to visit relatives over the years, but the opportunity had never presented itself. James had offered many times to arrange a flight for her, but something always seemed to come up. A health issue with her sister, bad weather, community commitments she couldn't break. So when James received the news that he was being considered for the CEO position at Skyline Airways, his thoughts immediately turned to his mother. If he got the job, the pinnacle of his career ambitions, he wanted Evelyn to be there for the announcement. This time he wouldn't take no for an answer. The board's decision came on a Wednesday afternoon. James was called into a meeting with the retiring CEO and the chairwoman of the board, where they formally offered him the position. He accepted on the spot, feeling a surge of emotion that took him by surprise. After 25 years of dedication, sacrifices, and hard work, he had reached a height that once seemed impossible. That evening, James called his mother with the news. "Mom, are you sitting down?" he asked, barely containing his excitement. I'm sitting, she chuckled. "What's got you so worked up?" "They've asked me to be the new CEO of Skyline Airways," he said, the words still feeling strange on his tongue. "I start next month." The line went quiet for a moment, and then he heard a soft sniffle. "Mom, are you crying?" "Happy tears," she assured him. "Your father would be so proud, James, so very proud." They talked for over an hour that night, reminiscing about the journey that had led to this moment. Before hanging up, James made his request. "I want you to come to Chicago for the official announcement next week, and this time I won't take no for an answer." Evelyn hesitated. "That's awfully short notice, and you know how I feel about being fussed over." "It's not fussing, Mom, it's celebrating. And I need you there." After some gentle persuasion, she agreed. James immediately set about making arrangements, deciding that this occasion called for something special. His mother deserved to experience the luxury that her hard work and sacrifices had helped make possible for him. He personally arranged for a first-class ticket on Skyline's premium route from Atlanta to Chicago. He reserved a suite at the city's most elegant hotel and arranged for a car service to pick her up from her home. For once, Evelyn Wilson would be treated like royalty. What James didn't tell his mother was that he had planned an additional surprise. The announcement of his appointment as CEO was scheduled for Friday morning, but he had arranged to take Thursday off so he could meet her flight when it arrived. He imagined the look of surprise on her face when she stepped off the plane to find him waiting at the gate. Little did he know that their reunion would happen sooner than planned, and under circumstances neither of them could have anticipated. Evelyn Wilson had never been one for fancy things. Her small home was comfortable but modest, decorated with family photos and mementos rather than expensive furnishings. Her wardrobe consisted mainly of practical clothes suitable for a retired teacher who spent most of her time gardening, volunteering at the local library, or attending church functions. Luxury in her mind was an unnecessary extravagance. So when the sleek black car arrived at her doorstep on Thursday morning, she felt distinctly out of place. The driver, a polite young man in a crisp uniform, insisted on carrying her single suitcase and held the door open for her with a respectful, "Good morning, Ms. Wilson." "This is too much," she muttered as she settled into the plush leather seat, but a small smile played at the corners of her mouth. Her son had always been thoughtful, even as a child with limited means. Now that he had the resources, his gestures had simply grown more elaborate. The drive to Atlanta International Airport was smooth and quick. Traffic parted as if by magic, so unlike her usual bus rides into the city. When they arrived, the driver escorted her directly to a special entrance marked Premium Passengers. "Your son has arranged for expedited check-in, Ms. Wilson," he explained, handing her suitcase to a waiting attendant. "They'll take good care of you from here." Evelyn thanked him and followed the attendant into the terminal, feeling slightly overwhelmed by the special treatment. The noise and bustle of the busy airport brought back memories of taking James to the observation deck all those years ago, his eyes wide with wonder as he watched the planes. Now here she was, about to board one of those same planes, on her way to see her son become CEO. The thought filled her with quiet pride. The special entrance led to a separate check-in area with plush seating and no lines. Soft music played in the background, and the few people waiting were dressed in expensive business attire, typing on laptops or speaking quietly into phones. Evelyn glanced down at her simple floral blouse, navy cardigan, and comfortable walking shoes, suddenly feeling conspicuous. She approached the counter where a young woman with immaculate makeup and a perfect blonde bun was typing rapidly on a computer. The name tag pinned to her crisp blue uniform read Heather. "Good morning," Evelyn said with a warm smile. "I have a flight to Chicago." Heather glanced up briefly, her eyes skimming over Evelyn before returning to her screen. "Name, please?" "Evelyn Wilson." The clicking of the keyboard filled the brief silence. Heather's brow furrowed slightly as she studied the information on her screen. "I see you're booked in first class." "Miss Wilson," she said, a note of surprise in her voice. "Yes, my son arranged it," Evelyn replied, feeling the need to explain her presence in this exclusive area. Heather's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose slightly. "I see." She continued typing, then frowned. "I'm showing a system error with your reservation. It seems there might be an issue with your first-class booking." Evelyn felt a flicker of concern. "An error? But my son confirmed everything yesterday." "These things happen," Heather said with a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Let me look into it further." While Heather continued working at her computer, Evelyn noticed a well-dressed couple approach another counter nearby. They were greeted warmly, their check-in process completed in minutes and sent on their way with directions to the first-class lounge. No mention of system errors for them. After several more minutes, Heather looked up again. "I'm afraid I can't resolve the issue with your first-class ticket, Ms. Wilson. However, we do have availability in economy class on the same flight." "But my son specifically booked first class," Evelyn said, reaching for her phone. "I have the confirmation right here." She pulled up the email James had forwarded to her, showing the detailed first-class reservation. Heather barely glanced at the phone. "As I mentioned, there seems to be a system error. These things happen occasionally." Her tone suggested that further discussion would be futile. "I can offer you an economy seat, or you can choose to wait for the next flight, though I can't guarantee first class will be available then either." Evelyn hesitated, feeling a mixture of confusion and discomfort. She wasn't one to make a fuss, and the thought of missing her son's big moment was unthinkable. Perhaps it truly was a computer error. Or perhaps she pushed the thought away. She'd encountered subtle discrimination throughout her life as a black woman in the South, but she preferred to give people the benefit of the doubt. Still, something about the situation felt off. "I don't want to miss my flight," she said finally. "If economy is the only option, then I'll take it." "Excellent choice," Heather said, her voice brightening. "Economy is quite comfortable, and I'm sure you'll find it more suitable." She began preparing a new boarding pass. "Your flight departs from gate C24 in 90 minutes. The economy boarding group will be called last." While Heather processed the change, Evelyn noticed another agent helping an elderly white gentleman. She couldn't hear their conversation clearly, but she did catch phrases like first class, lounge, and priority boarding. The man was dressed, casually in khaki pants and a golf shirt, more formally than Evelyn herself. A heaviness settled in her chest. She had spent decades teaching children to judge others by their character, rather than their appearance, hoping each new generation would move society closer to true equality. Yet here she was, a 70-year-old woman still facing the same subtle barriers she had encountered as a young teacher. Heather slid the economy boarding pass across the counter with a practiced smile. "Here you are, Ms. Wilson. Is there anything else I can assist you with today?" Evelyn took the boarding pass, considering whether to raise her concerns. But what would she say? That she suspected she was being downgraded because of her race or her appearance? There was no explicit evidence, just a familiar feeling she had experienced too many times before. "No, thank you," she replied softly, gathering her purse and the boarding pass. "The economy security line is to your left," Heather said, already turning her attention to her computer screen. "Have a pleasant flight." Evelyn walked away slowly, her earlier excitement dimmed by the interaction. She checked her watch and saw that she had plenty of time before boarding. Perhaps she should call James and tell him about the issue with her ticket. He would certainly know how to fix it, but then she thought about how busy he must be preparing for tomorrow's announcement. The last thing he needed was to worry about a ticket problem. And wasn't that part of why she had raised him to be independent, to solve his own problems and not burden others unnecessarily? No, she decided. She would handle this herself. First class or economy, the plane was going to the same place. She would be there for her son's big moment. And that was all that mattered. As she turned toward the security line, she nearly bumped into a young man in casual clothes, jeans and a navy polo shirt, who appeared to be in a hurry. He mumbled an apology without looking up from his phone and continued walking. Something about his profile seemed vaguely familiar, but Evelyn dismissed the thought. In her state of mild distress, she was probably imagining things. What Evelyn didn't realize was that the young man who had just passed her was heading directly to the first-class check-in counter where Heather was now helping another passenger. Nor did she realize that he had been standing nearby for the past few minutes, observing the entire interaction with growing concern and disbelief. That young man was her son, James Wilson, soon-to-be CEO of Skyline Airways. He had arrived at the airport early, hoping to catch a glimpse of his mother before surprising her at the gate. What he had witnessed instead had stopped him in his tracks and was now fueling a quiet determination as he approached the counter. Evelyn continued toward the security line, unaware that everything was about to change. Behind her, a scene was unfolding that would not only transform her journey, but would ultimately impact thousands of travelers and employees throughout the Skyline Airways network. The ripple effects of this morning's system error would extend far beyond what anyone could have anticipated. James Wilson had planned to surprise his mother at the gate. He had arrived at the airport early, dressed casually in jeans and a navy polo shirt rather than his usual tailored suit. Without the corporate attire, he moved through the terminal largely unrecognized. Just another traveler among thousands, exactly as he had intended. He had been standing near a coffee shop, watching the first-class check-in area from a distance, waiting for his mother to arrive. When he spotted her familiar figure approaching the counter, a warm smile spread across his face. She looked exactly as she always did, practical shoes, simple clothes, and that dignified posture that had commanded respect from generations of elementary school students. His plan had been to wait until she completed check-in, then follow her to the security line before revealing himself. But as he observed her interaction with the agent, his smile faded, replaced by a furrowing brow and a tightening jaw. Even from a distance, he could tell something was wrong. He moved closer, careful to remain out of his mother's line of sight, and positioned himself within earshot. What he heard transformed his surprise homecoming into something altogether different. As his mother walked away from the counter with an economy boarding pass in hand, James felt a complex mix of emotions wash over him. Anger at the treatment she had received, disappointment in his own company's staff, pride at how gracefully his mother had handled the situation, and beneath it all, a familiar hurt, the kind that came from seeing someone you love experience the subtle cuts of prejudice. He almost called out to her then, ready to sweep in and make everything right. But something stopped him. His mother had raised him to think before acting, to consider consequences, to transform negative experiences into positive change. This situation called for more than just fixing one ticket. It required addressing a deeper issue. So instead of following his mother, James turned and walked directly to the first-class check-in counter. He approached just as Heather was finishing with another passenger, an older white man in golf attire who was being directed to the first-class lounge with a warm smile. "I'll be with you in just a moment," Heather said without looking up, her fingers already flying over the keyboard. James waited patiently, observing her efficiency and professionalism. Under different circumstances, he might have appreciated these qualities in an employee. Today, they only highlighted the selective nature of her courtesy. "How may I help you?" she asked finally, looking up with the practiced smile she offered to all premium passengers. "I'd like to discuss a first-class reservation for Evelyn Wilson," James said calmly. The smile faltered slightly. "I just assisted Ms. Wilson. Unfortunately, there was a system error with her first-class booking. I was able to accommodate her in economy." James nodded thoughtfully. "That's interesting. I personally confirmed her first-class reservation yesterday. Could you explain what type of system error occurred?" Something in his tone caused Heather to look at him more carefully. "Sir, I'm not at liberty to discuss another passenger's reservation details. Perhaps you're a family member." "I am," James said. "I'm her son, I see. Well, as I explained to Ms. Wilson, these technical issues occasionally happen. Rest assured she'll arrive at her destination on schedule." "In economy," James added. "Yes, in economy. Which is quite comfortable, Heather replied, a defensive edge creeping into her voice. And yet the elderly gentleman who just left, the couple before my mother, and the businessman at the next counter all had their first-class reservations processed without any system errors. James's voice remained even, conversational almost. Heather's smile tightened. Each reservation is unique, sir. I simply work with the information in our system. I understand, James said, nodding slowly. May I see your supervisor, please? Now Heather looked truly uncomfortable. My supervisor is in a meeting at the moment. If you'd like to file a complaint, I can provide the customer service contact information. That won't be necessary, James said. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and removed his Skyline Airways ID badge, the one that identified him not just as an employee, but as the incoming chief executive officer. He placed it on the counter between them. I believe I can address this issue directly. The blood drained from Heather's face as she stared at the badge, then back at James, recognition finally dawning. The incoming CEO of Skyline Airways was standing at her counter, dressed in casual clothes, witnessing firsthand how his mother had been treated by his own company. Mr. Wilson, she stammered. I wasn't aware that Evelyn Wilson is my mother, James finished for her. No, I don't suppose you were. Heather's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her keyboard. I'll fix this immediately. We can upgrade her back to first class, provide compensation for the inconvenience. James held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. I'd like you to answer a question first, and I want you to be honest. Why was my mother downgraded? Heather's eyes darted around, looking for escape. Finding none, she swallowed hard. The system did flag her reservation for review, she admitted. But it was my decision to suggest the downgrade. Based on what criteria? A long pause followed. In the silence, they both knew the truth, but James needed her to acknowledge it. She didn't look like our typical first-class passenger. Heather finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. I assumed there had been a mistake in the booking. James nodded slowly. Thank you for your honesty. Now here's what's going to happen. My mother will fly first class as originally booked. You will personally escort her from wherever she is in this terminal back to this counter. Apologize for the confusion, and ensure she receives every courtesy Skyline offers its premium passengers. Heather nodded quickly. Of course, Mr. Wilson, right away. I'm not finished, James said. After that, you will contact your supervisor and explain exactly what happened here today. Not a sanitized version, not an excuse. The truth. Heather's eyes widened with fear. Am I being terminated? It was a reasonable question. As CEO, James could certainly fire her on the spot for discriminatory treatment of a passenger. Many executives would have done exactly that, but James thought about his mother, how she had always taught him that mistakes, even painful ones, were opportunities for growth. How she had shown forgiveness to students who acted out, believing they could learn and do better. How she had raised him to be not just successful but compassionate. No, Heather, you're not being terminated, he said after a moment. What happened here today isn't just about you. It's about unconscious biases that affect all of us, and systems that allow those biases to impact our decisions. If I fired everyone who made this kind of mistake, I'd have no employees left. Relief flooded her face, followed by confusion. She clearly hadn't expected this response. Instead, James continued, you're going to help me fix the system. Starting next month, you'll be part of a new training program on diversity and customer experience. You'll help design it based on what happened here today, and you'll participate in implementing it throughout our network. Heather stared at him, speechless. Think of it as a promotion of sorts, James said with a small smile, one with significant responsibility. Now my mother is heading toward security. I suggest you find her quickly. Heather nodded vigorously, reaching for her phone to call for assistance. And Heather? James added as she started to move away from the counter. My mother doesn't know I'm here. I'd like to keep my surprise for later, if possible. Of course, Mr. Wilson, she replied, a new note of respect in her voice. As Heather hurried away to find Evelyn, James remained at the counter, reflecting on what had just occurred. He had witnessed a perfect example of why diversity and leadership mattered. If he hadn't been there, if he hadn't seen firsthand how his mother was treated, would he have understood the need for systemic change as clearly? His thoughts were interrupted by his phone buzzing with a text message from the board chairwoman. asking about last-minute details for tomorrow's announcement. James smiled to himself. They had no idea that he was already at work, making perhaps the most important executive decision of his career, before officially taking the title. Across the terminal, Evelyn Wilson was standing in the economy security line, patiently waiting her turn when she heard someone calling her name. She turned to see the check-in agent who had downgraded her ticket hurrying toward her, accompanied by a uniformed Skyline Airways employee. She had no way of knowing that her simple journey was about to change course, not just for her flight today, but for the entire airline her son was about to lead. And somewhere behind her that son was watching, learning one final lesson from the woman who had taught him everything that truly mattered. Evelyn Wilson stood in the economy security line, mentally preparing herself for the flight ahead. She had just reached for her identification when she heard someone calling her name. Turning around, she was surprised to see the same check-in agent who had downgraded her ticket hurrying toward her, accompanied by a uniformed Skyline Airways employee. "Ms. Wilson," Heather called, slightly out of breath from rushing across the terminal. "I'm so glad we caught you before you went through security." Evelyn raised an eyebrow, curious about this sudden change. "Is there a problem with my flight?" "Not at all," Heather said, her demeanor completely transformed from their earlier interaction. Gone was the dismissive efficiency, replaced by an almost excessive attentiveness. "There's been a misunderstanding with your reservation that I need to correct immediately." The uniformed employee stepped forward with a warm smile. "Ms. Wilson, I'm Robert from Customer Relations. We would like to escort you back to the premium check-in area to resolve this issue." Evelyn hesitated, glancing at the security line she'd already been waiting in for 10 minutes. "My flight board's in about an hour. I don't want to miss it because of more misunderstandings." "I promise you won't miss your flight," Heather assured her quickly. "In fact, as a first-class passenger, you'll be boarding first. We just need to get you the correct boarding pass." First-class passenger. So it had been a mistake after all, or at least they were now claiming it was. Evelyn studied the young woman's face, noting the slight flush in her cheeks and a new nervousness in her manner. Something had changed, but what? "All right," Evelyn agreed, stepping out of line. "Lead the way." As they walked back through the terminal, Heather began what sounded like a carefully rehearsed apology. "Ms. Wilson, I want to sincerely apologize for the confusion earlier. There was no system error with your first-class reservation. The mistake was mine, and I'm truly sorry for the inconvenience and any discomfort I caused you." The candidness of the admission surprised Evelyn. In her experience, people rarely acknowledged their mistakes so directly. "After you left the counter," Heather continued, "I reviewed your reservation again and realized my error. Your first-class ticket wasn't as completely valid." Robert from Customer Relations added, "Skyline Airways is committed to providing exceptional service to all our passengers." "Ms. Wilson, what happened at check-in fell short of that commitment, and we're taking steps to make it right." They arrived back at the premium check-in area, which was now busy with travelers. Heather led Evelyn to a private desk away from the main counter, gesturing for her to take a seat in a plush chair. "I'll process your correct boarding pass right away," Heather said, typing rapidly on the computer. "In addition, we'd like to offer you a complimentary upgrade to first class on your return flight as well, along with access to our premium lounge today while you wait for boarding." Evelyn settled into the comfortable chair, still puzzled by the dramatic change in treatment. "That's very generous," she said cautiously. "But I'm curious, what exactly prompted this review of my reservation after I left?" Heather's typing faltered momentarily, and she exchanged a quick glance with Robert. "It's company policy to review any reservation changes," she said, not quite meeting Evelyn's eyes. "When I did so with yours, the inconsistency became apparent." It wasn't the whole truth. Evelyn was certain of that. After 40 years of teaching, she had developed a keen sense for when someone was holding something back. But she decided not to press further for now. Heather printed a new boarding pass and placed it in a premium ticket holder. "Your first-class seat is 3A, a window seat near the front of the cabin. Boarding will begin at gate C12 in approximately 45 minutes, but you're welcome to board at any time during the process." Robert stepped forward with a small gift bag bearing the Skyline Airways logo. "Ms. Wilson, please accept this as a token of our apology. Inside you'll find a travel comfort kit, a voucher for our in-flight duty-free shopping, and a card for priority assistance with any future bookings. Evelyn accepted the bag with a gracious nod. Though such extravagant gestures made her somewhat uncomfortable, she had never been one to expect special treatment. "Now," Robert continued, "if you'll allow me, I'd be honored to escort you through our priority security line and to our premium lounge where you can relax before your flight." As they walked through the terminal, Evelyn noticed several employees glancing their way with curious expressions. Robert guided her through the expedited security process, where her bags were screened without her having to remove her shoes or jacket, a stark contrast to the regular security line she had been standing in earlier. Beyond security, Robert led her to an elevator that took them to a higher level of the terminal. When the doors opened, Evelyn found herself in a quiet, elegantly appointed lounge with comfortable seating, a buffet of food, and large windows overlooking the runways. "Welcome to our premium lounge, Ms. Wilson," said the attendant at the entrance, scanning her boarding pass with a respectful nod. "Please make yourself comfortable. We'll announce your flight when it's time to board." Robert ensured she was settled in a comfortable seat near the window, arranged for a complimentary beverage to be brought to her, and provided his business card with his direct number. "If there's anything at all you need during your journey today, please don't hesitate to contact me personally," he said before departing. Alone at last, Evelyn sipped her tea and gazed out at the planes taking off and landing. The lounge was peaceful compared to the busy terminal below, with soft background music and the occasional quiet conversation among business travelers. It was certainly a pleasant way to wait for a flight, though she couldn't help feeling it was unnecessarily lavish. Her thoughts turned to her son. Had James somehow arranged all of this special treatment? It seemed unlikely. He couldn't have known about her earlier experience at check-in unless she had called him, which she hadn't. And the demeanor of the staff suggested something more significant than routine VIP treatment. As Evelyn pondered the situation, a smartly dressed woman in a Skyline Airways executive uniform approached her table. "Ms. Wilson, I'm Diane Powell, Customer Experience Director for Skyline Airways. May I join you for a moment?" Evelyn gestured to the empty seat across from her. "Of course." Diane settled into the chair, her expression both professional and genuinely apologetic. "I wanted to personally apologize for your experience at check-in today. It's been brought to my attention, and I want to assure you that what happened does not reflect our company values." Now Evelyn was truly curious. A director-level executive personally apologizing for a simple ticket misunderstanding? That's very kind of you, Ms. Powell, but it seems like a small issue to warrant this level of attention. Diane hesitated, choosing her words carefully. At Skyline Airways, we pride ourselves on treating all passengers with dignity and respect. What happened at check-in today suggested biases that we are working hard to eliminate from our company culture. Ah, Evelyn thought. So that was it. Someone had recognized the incident for what it likely was, a case of subtle discrimination, and had escalated it significantly. But that still didn't explain the extraordinary response. "I appreciate your candor," Evelyn said, "and your company's attention to the matter. Though I must admit I'm still not quite sure why this particular incident has generated such a response." Diane smiled diplomatically. "Let's just say that ensuring every passenger has an excellent experience is our top priority, especially as we enter a new chapter for the airline." A new chapter. The words caught Evelyn's attention immediately. Could her son's upcoming CEO announcement be connected to all of this somehow? Before she could ponder it further, the lounge attendant approached. "Ms. Wilson, your flight to Chicago is preparing for boarding. Would you like to board now, or would you prefer to wait until the general announcement?" "I'll head down now," Evelyn decided, gathering her belongings. Whatever was happening, she would likely get more answers in Chicago when she saw James. Diane stood and extended her hand. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Ms. Wilson. I hope the rest of your journey with us is nothing short of excellent." As Evelyn was escorted to her gate, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story than she was being told. Little did she know that her son had been orchestrating everything from behind the scenes, or that her experience today would ultimately lead to significant changes throughout Skyline Airways. At the gate, Evelyn was the first passenger invited to board. As she walked down the jetway, she noticed several crew members standing at attention, their expressions unusually alert and attentive. The lead flight attendant greeted her by name as she stepped onto the aircraft. Welcome aboard, Ms. Wilson. We're honored to have you flying with us today. Your seat is right this way. The first-class cabin was spacious and elegant, with just 8 large seats arranged in pairs. Evelyn was shown to her window seat, where a fresh orchid had been placed alongside a handwritten note thanking her for choosing Skyline Airways. As she settled in, a flight attendant immediately appeared with a choice of welcome beverages. Would you care for champagne, orange juice, or sparkling water before takeoff, Ms. Wilson? Just water would be lovely, thank you, she replied, still somewhat bewildered by the extraordinary attention. As other first-class passengers boarded, Evelyn noticed several of them glancing her way with curious expressions. She smiled politely but turned her attention to the window, watching the ground crew prepare the aircraft for departure. When the seat beside her remained empty, even as the boarding process neared completion, Evelyn assumed she'd been given extra space as part of the airline's apology. She was just beginning to relax into the luxurious accommodations when she heard a familiar voice. "I believe this seat is taken." Evelyn turned, and her hand flew to her mouth in surprise. Standing in the aisle with a warm smile and twinkling eyes was her son. "James," she exclaimed. "What on earth are you doing here? I thought you were in Chicago preparing for tomorrow's announcement." The pieces suddenly began falling into place. The extraordinary response to her check-in experience, the executive-level apology, the special treatment from every staff member she had encountered. They knew who she was. Or more precisely, they knew who her son was. As James settled into the seat beside her, Evelyn's mind was racing with questions. But before she could voice any of them, she caught a glimpse of something in her son's expression, a look that told her he knew far more about her morning at the airport than should have been possible. "James Wilson," she said, lowering her voice as the realization dawned. "Were you at the airport this morning? Did you see what happened at check-in?" The slight smile that played across his lips confirmed her suspicion. Her son, the soon-to-be CEO of Skyline Airways, had witnessed everything, and in doing so, had set in motion events that would transform not just their journey today, but the future of the entire airline. "I was planning to surprise you at the gate," James admitted, his voice low as the flight attendants prepared for departure. "I got to the airport early and was waiting near the check-in area when you arrived." Evelyn's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "So you saw everything?" James nodded, reaching over to take his mother's hand. "Every word. And that's why everyone has been treating me like royalty since then," Evelyn said, the pieces finally coming together. "Not because I'm a valued customer, but because I'm the CEO's mother." "Soon-to-be CEO," James corrected with a small smile. "And yes, that's part of it. But what happened this morning was wrong, Mom. It would have been wrong no matter who you were." The plane began pushing back from the gate, and they paused their conversation as the flight attendants performed the safety demonstration. Evelyn used the moment to gather her thoughts, processing the implications of what her son had witnessed and apparently addressed in some way. When they were airborne and the seatbelt sign had been turned off, James continued. "I had a choice to make when I saw how you were treated. I could have stepped in immediately, pulled rank, made a scene." "That's not your style," Evelyn observed. "No," he agreed, "and it's not what you taught me. Remember when Tommy Jenkins kept breaking my pencils in 3rd grade? Evelyn smiled at the memory. "I told you that responding with anger would only teach him that anger was the right response to problems." "You told me to find a better way," James said. "And that's what I tried to do today. Instead of firing Heather, the check-in agent," Evelyn clarified. "Yes. Instead of firing her, which would have been within my rights as incoming CEO, I'm making her part of the solution. She's going to help develop a new training program on unconscious bias and customer experience." Evelyn studied her son's face, pride swelling in her chest. "You're starting your tenure as CEO by addressing a systemic problem rather than just punishing an individual." "I learned from the best," James said with a warm smile. "You always said that true change happens when people have the chance to recognize their mistakes and do better." A flight attendant approached with a tray of warm towels and paused, noticing their clasped hands and serious expressions. "I'm sorry to interrupt. Would you prefer I come back later?" "No, that's all right," Evelyn said kindly. "Thank you." As they refreshed themselves with the warm towels, Evelyn considered how her simple journey had unexpectedly become a pivotal moment for her son's company. It wasn't the first time she had experienced bias, subtle or otherwise, but it was perhaps the first time she had seen it lead to positive change so immediately. "I'm curious," she said, after the flight attendant had moved on. "What made you decide to join me on the flight instead of waiting in Chicago as planned?" James laughed softly. "Would you believe the board chairwoman suggested it?" After I called to tell her what happened, she said, "James, sometimes the most important leadership moments happen before you officially take the title. Go with your mother. Use this time. The announcement can wait a day." "Sounds like a wise woman," Evelyn remarked. "She is." And she was right. James lowered his voice, leaning in slightly. "Mom, what happened today isn't an isolated incident. It happens in airports, hotels, restaurants, stores, everyday places where people make snap judgments based on appearance." "I'm aware," Evelyn said dryly. "I've been Black in America for 70 years. James acknowledged this with a respectful nod. "Of course. But what I'm trying to say is that most companies treat these incidents as public relations problems, rather than opportunities for genuine change. When I take over as CEO, I want Skyline to be different. And thanks to what happened today, I already have a clear first initiative." The flight attendant returned with their lunch menus, and they paused their conversation again. Evelyn took the moment to reflect on her son's words. Throughout his career, she had watched him navigate the complex intersections of race, opportunity, and corporate America. He had faced barriers and biases, had been underestimated and overlooked. Yet he had risen steadily, not by ignoring these challenges, but by addressing them thoughtfully and strategically. Now he was about to become CEO of a major airline, and his first act of leadership had been sparked by his mother's experience with the very company he was about to lead. There was a powerful symmetry to it that wasn't lost on either of them. "I have a proposition for you," James said after they had ordered their meals. "One that might take you out of your comfort zone a bit." "Oh?" Evelyn raised an eyebrow, instantly wary. Her son had inherited her determination, which sometimes meant he had ideas that pushed boundaries. "The training program I mentioned, the one Heather will help develop. I'd like you to be part of it too." Evelyn blinked in surprise. "Me? James, I'm a retired elementary school teacher, not a corporate trainer." "Exactly," James said, his eyes alight with conviction. "You taught diverse classrooms for 40 years. You know how to help people recognize their biases and grow beyond them, and you do it with compassion rather than condemnation." "That was with children," Evelyn pointed out. "Adults are a different matter entirely." "Are they?" James challenged gently. "In my experience, adults who display bias aren't usually malicious, they're unaware. They need the same kind of guidance you gave your students. Clear boundaries, opportunities for reflection, and a chance to do better." The flight attendant arrived with their appetizers, a small plate of grilled prawns for James and a cup of tomato bisque for Evelyn. They thanked her and continued their conversation in between bites. "What exactly would this involvement look like?" Evelyn asked, her curiosity piqued despite her reservations. "Initially, just sharing your story, today's experience and others like it, with our training team. Later, perhaps some consultation on the curriculum or even direct participation in pilot sessions." James watched his mother carefully, gauging her reaction. "It would be entirely on your terms, of course." "No pressure." Evelyn stirred her soup thoughtfully. Part of her wanted to decline immediately. She had never sought the spotlight, had always preferred to work quietly in the background. But another part of her recognized the opportunity this presented, a chance to contribute to meaningful change in an institution her son was about to lead. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "That's not a yes, mind you." "Of course not," James agreed with a smile that suggested he knew exactly which way she would eventually decide. They enjoyed the remainder of their meal in comfortable conversation, deliberately shifting to lighter topics: James's new apartment in Chicago, Evelyn's garden plans for the coming spring, memories of their Sunday phone calls over the years. It was only as the flight began its descent into O'Hare International Airport that they returned to the matter at hand. "There's one more thing you should know," James said, his expression turning serious again. "The board has decided to incorporate today's events into tomorrow's announcement." Evelyn's brow furrowed with concern. "Is that wise? It might be seen as airing the company's dirty laundry, or it might be seen as transparency and a commitment to improvement," James countered. "We're not going to name names or shame individuals. We're simply going to acknowledge that an incident occurred that highlighted the need for better training and awareness. And we're going to announce the new initiative as my first act as CEO. With me potentially involved, Evelyn added, still processing the idea. Only if you're comfortable with it, James assured her. The announcement won't mention your participation unless you decide to take on that role. The seatbelt sign illuminated as they began their final approach. Evelyn gazed out the window at the Chicago skyline emerging through scattered clouds. It was a far cry from the small neighborhood where she had raised her son, watching planes fly overhead while telling him he could reach for the stars. You know, she said softly, when I told you the sky was just the beginning, I never imagined you'd take it quite so literally. James laughed, the tension of the day easing from his shoulders. Neither did I, but here we are. Here we are indeed, Evelyn agreed, squeezing her son's hand as the wheels touched down on the runway. 6 months later, Evelyn Wilson stood at the podium in Skyline Airways corporate headquarters, addressing a room full of employees as part of the company's new Dignity and Respect training program. Beside her stood Heather, the check-in agent whose actions had inadvertently sparked a corporate transformation. In the months since James had officially taken the helm as CEO, Skyline Airways had implemented a series of changes that went far beyond traditional diversity training. The company had revised its hiring practices to attract a more diverse workforce, created mentorship programs to support the advancement of underrepresented groups, and established a customer advisory board to provide feedback on the passenger experience from multiple perspectives. But perhaps most significantly, they had developed the training program that Evelyn was now helping to facilitate, a program that used real experiences, including her own, to illustrate how unconscious biases affected customer interactions and workplace dynamics. The measure of a company isn't whether mistakes occur, Evelyn told the assembled employees, her teacher's voice still strong and clear at 71. It's what happens after those mistakes are recognized. Do we deny them? Do we make excuses? Or do we see them as opportunities to learn and grow? In the back of the room, James watched his mother with immense pride. The incident that might have been just another story of discrimination had instead become a catalyst for change, not just for one airline, but potentially for an entire industry. As the session concluded and employees approached his mother to thank her for sharing her story, James reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought them here. His mother had taught him many things throughout his life, but perhaps her greatest lesson had been demonstrated rather than spoken, that with dignity, persistence, and forgiveness, even painful experiences could be transformed into sources of growth and positive change. And as Evelyn Wilson accepted a lifetime first class pass to anywhere Skyline flew, presented by Heather herself in a gesture of both appreciation and symbolic reconciliation, James knew that his mother's influence would continue to shape not just his leadership, but the culture of the company he now led. The journey that had begun with a denied first-class seat had ultimately led to first-class change, proving once again that the sky was indeed just the beginning.